What was wrestling's appeal to you? Why did you become wrestlers?
I came out of the Navy, and I had always been a wrestling fan as a kid. I grew up watching wrestling, as most kids did, I think, in those days. Actually, I was home on leave when I had about a month and a half to go in the Navy, and I went down to the Minneapolis Auditorium where my hero-to-be was performing that night, superstar Billy Graham. And when Billy walked to the ring that night, and I watched him, my mind was made up at that point. Coming out of the Navy, I was going to college. I thought, you know what? I want to do what he's doing.
What appealed to you? Was it the athleticism or the entertainment value or the...
For me, it was a combination of both. You know, I was somebody in high school who always liked to get a reaction. You like to have an audience, even if it's just one person. And I saw pro wrestling as being a combination of the best of those two things. And I thought I could make up what I lacked in physical skills with some kind of, theatrical abilities. And for me, just like Jesse saw Billy Graham and decided that's what I want to do, for me it was one night at Madison Square Garden seeing Snuka leap off the top of the cage in 1983, and I thought, that's what I want to do. Not so much because of the athleticism or the danger, but because of the reaction it got. Mm-hmm. I thought, that could be me.
And I think for me too, Barry, it was when I did go to college, I was on the GI Bill, so I really hadn't thought of a major. And so I took a lot of theater in college. I found that very interesting at that time to take theater. And to me, wrestling was physical theater. It was a way to perform rather than, doing typical theater in the round or being an actor. This allowed you to be a theatrical performer and yet be physical and be able to tell a story. And I think Mick will agree with me, there's not a greater feeling than to be in front of a crowd of 20,000 people and have them right there in the palm of your hand.
It never happened to me, but...
Oh, it did too. No, but I mean, to where everything you do, you literally are controlling that crowd, their emotions. And that's a powerful feeling and a powerful position to be in.
Yet, when you quit, that is a very powerful feeling. Mm-hmm. When you quit, how do you adjust to life without that?
For me, when I quit, it was more the case of survival. I realized, in watching a lot of the old timers in my era who stayed too long, that they ended up becoming really physically injured and I realized that yes, there'll be life after this. And so you got to pick a time, I think, when you feel that, your health may be on the line. If you continue a couple more years, you may pay a pretty severe price.
Yeah, I was physically shot a good 5 years before I retired. But I think if I hadn't retired when I had, one of the big turning points for me is when I had a chance to write the autobiography. And I thought, because I had taken so many shots, especially to the head, and I never was smart enough, or maybe I thought it was a cool thing, a matter of, your toughness to not put the hands up, like I thought the fans would notice. And I guess they did accept that I was the guy that really took the blows. But I was concerned because I was starting to have some problems with my memory. And when I sat down to do the autobiography and found that my memory was working well and that my brain was working much better than I really had any right to, I thought, one more year of this and I might not have that gift. So I got out, and your movie, had something to do with it. I think it was your movie and the book gave my career a sense of closure, where I thought I've done everything that I ever set out to do and more. And then also the writing was beneficial in that, the same way Jesse talked about having the 20,000 people in the palm of your hand. In a strange way, now you have hundreds of thousands of people in the palm of your hand. Maybe you don't get that immediate response, but you're knowing, to me, that you write a good paragraph and it's every bit as fulfilling as performing a good move or getting that big cheer from the crowd. So,
but you used to performing, let's say, in front of 20,000 people, right, and you're hearing those cheers, and now you're home. How do you make that adjustment? Both of you had families. How did you make the adjustments to your family? And how did your families make the adjustments to you always being around, where you were never around before?
I think for me, it's that you got to get focused on something else. You have to have an inner drive and get your attention focused to where, okay, I've done everything I could do in wrestling, but my life certainly isn't over now. There's plenty more to do out there. And I think that if you're the type of person that can find a focus into something else, it makes the transition a whole lot easier. Far too long in our business, you see people that stay too long. You really do. And unfortunately, I don't think they're capable of changing their focus to something else.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys who are forced out, what they consider prematurely, even though that's usually not the case, they sit there and they're bitter about the fact that they didn't get the run that they really wanted. And in a lot of cases, the business dictates that guys, they kind of, they do overstay their welcome. And I remember guys, not to pick on people, but someone like Chief Jay Strongbow, who was a big star, and then he'd be the opening match in the Garden, and he'd lose in 2 or 3 minutes. And you think, the Chief should have gone out up here. And I think that when you do retire on your own, and you do retire at a career high, that it makes the adjustment easier.
And I'm going to add another thing, Barry. It seems that whenever someone does want to leave the business, that's when the business will pay closest attention to him and not let him. Mick's laughing because he knows what I'm saying is the truth.
Right.
Because anytime you'd see someone who finally came to the decision, I'm getting out of this business. Well, then all of a sudden a promoter would come along, give him a huge push, give him a whole new, it was almost like the tentacles could never release you for a lot of people.
I spoke to Vince McMahon on November 2nd. I had what I thought was my first really embarrassing match, where I really just couldn't physically do it anymore. I fell down a couple of times doing moves that I'd done hundreds of times in the past. And Vince was very understanding. We set up a retirement for like 6 weeks later, and Vince said, "Hey, Mick, you've had your last match." He was willing to let me go then. The very next day, Steve Austin came down with a big neck injury, and I didn't feel that, A, I could let the team down by taking off at the same time Steve got hurt, and B, there was that spot open, to really have a really nice last run. So instead of retiring in January, I retired in April.
And doing the film,
right?
Paranoia runs rampant in that business, much more than even the entertainment business, where it's also quite high. How do you deal with that? How do you? I saw it change perspectives on everything in life. And I always said the wrestlers live in the land of the con,
right?
Yeah, conning the audience and playing with them. But how does that not bleed over into your other life and other relationships?
By separating it. By keeping Jesse Ventura, this character, in the ring, but he's not. When the lights are off, I'm a different person. I think you have to, and there are guys that lost that.
Oh yeah.
There are guys that became their character.
Right.
And the typical for me is Mad Dog Vachon. Whoever Maurice was before Mad Dog was long gone, right?
I didn't know him that well. I'm thinking more about Vince personally.
Well, Mad Dog became the Mad Dog. I mean, he was the Mad Dog Vachon. There was no Maurice Vachon anymore. And I think the key is to always remember you're playing a role out there.
But it goes back to that thing where you're saying that feel of the crowd, right? Mm-hmm. And you're on the road all the time. And you're this guy, you're Jesse Ventura, the body Ventura, and you're having 20,000 people do what you want them to do. In your case, boo you. And then you go back to the hotel room, and you're not Jesse Ventura.
Well,
and you're alone, and you don't have that. That's an incredible adrenaline rush.
I was very much an individual. I didn't hang out a lot in wrestling. A lot of guys, when the matches are over, would always meet in the clubs and go drinking and the camaraderie and all that. I never did that. I went to my hotel room, I'd watch a movie, I'd fall asleep, I'd work out the next day. I always just felt that this sport is so individual to begin with, and it's so cutthroat. It didn't take you long, right, Mick? You learned pretty quick about the cutthroat of it. And I just never really got close with anyone, professional.
Describe the cutthroat.
Well, the cutthroat is you're fighting for money. You're fighting for position.
It's something I saw really bother me a couple of years ago is Taz came in, big reputation, and I saw 3 guys in the locker room just tear him apart verbally when he wasn't in the room, and all it would have taken was those same 3 guys to do that to me when I got there, and talk badly about me, especially to the office personnel, and my career would have been done. I think that guys who see people as a threat, they tend to look after their own job. I was lucky in the sense that my character was seen as being unique, and there weren't other guys out there trying to take my spot. My spot in the rotation, as like one of the top 3 or 4 guys, but no one really was trying to be the next Mick Foley or Cactus Jack, I kind of had that spot to myself, so I was always kind of secure with it. But I saw them do a number on Taz, and he's not the only guy, and that's the ugly side of it, when you see that kind of gang mentality and you see really promising careers being thrown away because of jealousy.
And it's a battle for position.
Yeah.
Okay, in the business, I found that, hey, if I can do a match and get it over without taking a Mick Foley bump, why would I? A lot of guys have to take them because that's what they have to do to get over. I didn't. Let me put it to you this way. One of the greatest matches I used to have was with Tito Santana. And I'll never forget, in Denver, Colorado, we were supposed to go 20 minutes. The announcer had already yelled 10 minutes gone, and Tito and I hadn't even touched each other yet, and yet I had them out of their chairs standing 3 times. And we hadn't even touched each other. They were going ballistic. And so when I can kill 10 minutes of less abuse on my body and still give the people to where they go home that night drained because they're yelling and screaming and going crazy, you've done your job. And the job isn't always the biggest bump you can take.
But, we used to use the 3-ring circus analogy, and you'd say, there has to be something for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so for a long time, I was kind of the guy who got shot out of the cannon. You had to have that too. So you couldn't have a whole card of matches like you had with Tito. You had to have a different variety. And as I went on, I tried to find matches that I could do in my last year without taking a single bump.
Let me add how the business has also changed. When I first came into the business, nobody went to the floor except the main event. You got orders. Right. Nobody took the big bumps because that was left for the main event. Now you watch wrestling, the opening bout is doing things that they would never have allowed before because you built the crescendo to the main event.
Right.
Everyone was there in support of building the card around the main event. Now you got kids beating each other with chairs, going out on the floor in the first bout. Well, then what's left for the main event? When the people after 2 bouts have virtually seen everything they can possibly see in a street fight, how do you follow it?
When I was in ECW, it was awfully tough when you went out there at the end. And,
they've seen it all.
In one example, Terry Funk had literally hung somebody from the balcony. And now we got to go out there and try to follow it. It was very, very difficult.
Yeah, see, and that's where I think the business has gotten a little out of control.
I think the guys have had to in order to keep things going, especially during the wrestling war. It was like the bar got set higher and higher and higher, not just with wild things, but also with the quality of the matches. That now there's...
To me, the other thing, Mick, is this. Name me one move today that's devastating and someone hasn't kicked out of it.
Well, there is none.
See, that's the problem. In my era, there were certain moves, when you applied them, the public knew this match is over. And that was the buildup to whether the guy could get that move. Now today, I don't care what you've done to him, everybody's kicked out 5 times. I mean, there are so many finishing moves today that are used simply as high spots that to me, it's deteriorated to where what is a finishing move?
It's because the wrestlers are more resilient now. They can...
It's because they don't know no better now. Because they don't leave themselves any margin for movement.
Yeah, but I think wrestling went the way it did out of necessity. I think if you did have just a suplex as a finish, and you were doing that in the middle of a wrestling war where WCW had their 3 hours live and we had our 2 hours live, it naturally becomes like a weapons escalation.
But it's like, to me, Macho Man Randy Savage, when he came off that top rope with the elbow, nobody should be getting up from that. Right. Nobody. And yet in the end, everybody was getting up from it. Well, to me, you're trying to tell me somebody goes up, jumps 10 feet off a thing and lands on somebody with an elbow, the guy's going to kick out and walk away? No. No. End of story. No. But now they do. Now it's just a high spot.
And I thought Ole Anderson was bitter.
I'm not bitter. I'm just telling you the difference between what I've, as a true observer now, because I've been out of the business for 13 years.
Do you still watch wrestling?
No.
Mick, do you still watch it? The truth.
Yeah, I do. I watch it.
If you didn't know some of the guys.
Right.
I mean, because, some of them are still friends with people you worked with.
You know, there are still moments in wrestling where I watch it and I say, and one of them was last year. I was at your house and we saw the gay wedding. And even though the execution of the gay wedding was miserable, but the build-up, we were watching it, we were laughing, and it was like, I remember why I love this stuff so much. And every once in a while, maybe I do watch it, you know, partly because people expect me to be up on it, and I feel like I have to have some knowledge. But there are some things about it I still enjoy. And the great thing is I can get work done, and I can read a book and only pay attention to the things that I want to. And here's a little story for you. I'm working on this book set in 1956 in the civil rights era. So I start studying the civil rights, and so you can't really know civil rights without knowing Martin Luther King. So I start reading about him. You can't really know Martin Luther King without knowing Gandhi, because he was a big influence. And I'm reading Gandhi and I'm watching SmackDown, and I realize I could very well be the first person to do those two things simultaneously.